Hi, welcome to session 6, and in this session we shall focus on um, planning for effective results management. So, in other words, we are focusing on results based management for any intervention in development processes. So, therefore, our objective is to have an overview of the planning tools for effective results management, but we won't comprehensively look at all of the tools, but we are focusing mainly on the tools that can help in managing results and therefore helping in carrying out effective monitoring and evaluation. So we shall focus on logical framework, which I think some of you or most of you are familiar with. And then we look at theory of change and then results based management in form of also following with the results chain. Okay, so let's begin. So, planning for efficiency and effectiveness of any intervention requires managers to have certain tools or instruments that would guide on how such efficiency and effectiveness through implementation would be achieved, and therefore requires some kind of strategic management attributes, so that at the end of the day such results following the implementation of the project, such results should be able to be attributed to that particular project, and therefore to improve high levels of attribution to that particular intervention, then managers and project implementers should be aware of what they are implementing for, why they are implementing the project, and what kind of results they are expecting to have. Otherwise, we all know that by definition, a project or is a program is a combination of different projects that are interrelated, that at the end of implementation of all these projects, you should be able to achieve the overall program objective. So but then when it comes to measurements of particular results, we need to be able to say that, okay, if we have carried out, for instance, impact evaluation, then we can be able to know that these particular results are attributed to this particular intervention or project. So if you want to think of it like that. So for instance, if you look at Uganda now has moved through all these kinds of programs, Bonabagagawari, Entandikwa, prosperity for all, wealth creation. Now there is Emyoga, whatever. All those are programs. Even NADS was a program and so on. But under those particular programs, there were different projects, and those projects had their own specific goals and specific activities that would result in particular changes within the target population or target areas. So at the end of the day, managers of such interventions must plan and forecast particular results that they need to manage and therefore achieve through the implementation and after implementation, to be able to know that, okay, following the implementation of that particular project, then these are the results that need to be achieved, and therefore at the evaluation phase they should be able to assess whether such results have been achieved or not. So in this case, managers, in most cases, most projects have focused on using the logical framework and results based management ideas. So let's begin with logical framework. A logical framework is any tool. It's a 4x4 matrix that summarizes the elements of the intervention, and of course, it's some kind of a planning procedure which draws a criteria for which results would be measured. In that case, to assess whether the project or intervention has failed or has succeeded. But of course, putting into consideration that there are several factors that affect the success or that affect the success of that particular intervention. Yeah, so we all know that projects, while we tend to focus so much on projects, the internal mechanisms of the projects, there are always other factors that are external to the project that can influence whether the project can be successful or not. And we are going to look at this in a moment. And of course, so when there's this kind of systematic planning, then that such the results are planned for, but also those factors that would affect achievement of results, they are planned for. And so the logical framework helps to summarize and give managers such kind of a picture on how certain results would be achieved under specific conditions. So it involves, of course, sensible planning. So applying some kind of sensible thinking and logic, and of course, this is done before the intervention, of course, is implemented, because you want to know what you are implementing and how you are implementing it, and what kind of results you propose to achieve. So the logical framework expresses a chain of results, and that's the result chain that we shall look at in a moment. So therefore gives an overview of activities, inputs, outcomes, and impact results, and those are the ones that the evaluator should be able to measure and assess whether there has been achievement or whether achievement has not been there, and why, of course, based on particular circumstances. So this is the 4x4 matrix I was talking about. And of course, for some, there is, while we know it as a 4x4 matrix, yeah, some organizations have their own ways of arranging it, but still the whole idea on how it should be structured is common among many. So sometimes the difference is on the budget. So you'll find some organization include budgets within the logical framework itself, within the matrix itself, while others dissociate the logical framework and the inputs. Although without inputs, these other logics of the matrix wouldn't be realized. Okay, so we'll talk about the rows, and then we shall also talk about the columns. So let's begin with the rows. So on the rows, so you see you have goals, and a goal is the overall objective, and therefore explains why the intervention is important, but also shows, of course, the longer term benefits, and in this case we can term it as impact. So when you implement your project, for instance, on women empowerment, or any let's say a poultry farming project, or a citrus farming project, at the end of the day, what do you want to create among the target population or within the community where you are implementing that particular development project? So that's the goal, and that's what is stated under goal. Under purpose, you have the core problem, which is usually, for instance, let's say your project is focuses on let's say your project focuses on reducing, I mean, focuses on improving antenatal care among pregnant women in a certain community. So the core problem there would be that maybe perhaps there has been limited access and use of antenatal care services among women in a certain community. So that would be, so your purpose in this case would be that you want to implement a project and that would reduce, I mean, that would improve the use of antenatal care among pregnant mothers, and therefore that would lead to, for instance, your impact or your goal would be in that case reduction in maternal mortality rates, or child mortality, infant mortality rate, or something like that. So because it has been shown that, okay, those who do not utilize antenatal care, and therefore the skilled attendants verify or can be able to ascertain whether the mother is okay to deliver well, then at the end of the day, if that mother did not utilize the antenatal care, then there is a high chance that they might choose to deliver at home, and therefore maybe face complications, and then they might die. So by improving antenatal care health service use, then you would have contributed to reduction or over reduction in maternal and child mortality rate. Okay, so but of course, before you achieve the outcomes which would lead to impact, then you must have achieved the outputs. So the outputs are the services or the immediate results that are in form of course, goods and services that just result from a combination of inputs and activities. So when activities are implemented using certain budgetary resources or human resources, such a combination then would be able to lead to goods and services that would be delivered to a target group. Take an example, maybe a certain community is experiencing a shortage of clean water, and therefore you intend to improve on access to access and use of clean water among a certain community. Then in that case, you could maybe decide to construct boreholes or extend tapped water to this community. So extension of this tapped water and construction of these boreholes, then that would be an output from maybe a combination of resources and human resources, I mean financial resources and human resources, that would help in a whole series of combination of activities that would lead to such goods and outputs in terms of boreholes. How many boreholes have been constructed? So the number of boreholes that have been constructed would be the outputs. But then those outputs should be able to lead to maybe your main objective is maybe to improve access and use of safe water, and therefore which would create a certain impact in a community, maybe reduction in waterborne diseases. Okay, so the activities, of course, the processes in processes that contribute to how certain goods and services or outputs would be achieved. So in other words, it's how the outputs can be achieved. Then you also have inputs, like I said, some are included as part of the matrix, but others detach them from the matrix. But of course, the inputs are the materials or resources needed to perform activities, and therefore could lead to outputs. Then outputs lead to outcomes, and outcomes would lead to the overall objective, which is impact. Okay, so this is here your summary of the rows. So you have inputs, the resources that can be used to for implementation, and then you have the inputs would influence how the activities would be done. So the activities is what you do to produce desired outputs, and the outputs are the immediate, of course, immediate products or goods or services that are derived from a combination of activities and inputs, and those outputs would lead to outcomes, and these are the medium results that you wish to achieve, and therefore those would lead to impact the aim that the development change that you would want to achieve. So as you can see here, you have plans, budgets, and implementation, and most of monitoring is done here, and then evaluation can also begin from just right here, from outputs onwards. But as we move towards impact and management of results towards impact, you'll know that some leverages of the level of control over the project keeps reducing as you move towards achievement of outcomes and impacts, and of course that would depend on other factors, as we shall see. So on the columns, you have objective verifiable indicators. These are the, of course, the interventions objectives. These are the measurements that you would use to assess whether you have achieved your objectives. So whether you have achieved an objective on activities, whether you have achieved your outcomes and outputs, whether you have achieved your main goal, or your overall goal, which is impact. So in other words, they define the quality, the quantity, the time, or those who you want to target for that objective, or where you want certain changes to happen. So those are the verifiable indicators. So the indicators, in simple terms, are measurements that you those that okay, these are the objective verifiable indicators are the variables that you need to measure and to be able to ascertain whether you have achieved your intended result. And of course, these indicators can be to be able to verify or ascertain whether you have achieved those indicators. You need information. Now, where do you get that information? Now, the means of verification gives provides how and where certain information would be gotten, that can be assessed and analyzed to ascertain whether certain variables or indicators have been achieved. And this is here, this is where now monitoring and evaluation processes matter a lot, because monitoring and evaluation processes are the ones that would generate such information to validate whether you have achieved your objectives or your results or not. So indicators should be specific in terms of quantity, quality. For instance, okay, you want to achieve maybe 50% of women in a certain community should be able to use antenatal care. Okay, you are specific in terms of quantity or quality, or in time, or by the end of this time. Okay, should be measurable with the indicator show desirable change. Is it sensitive to changes in policies or programs? Do stakeholders agree on exactly what to measure? So all those are ways of stating your indicators. Are they achievable, or they are not achievable? Are they realistic or not realistic? Some agencies set result expectations, and they end up not getting them because they do not put into factor into they do not put into consideration the factors that would influence achievement of those results, such as finance, do you have enough budget, such as politics, is there, or leadership, organizational leadership, does organizational leadership offer enough support to implementation of such project to achieve those goals, all those sorts of factors. So is it achievable? Is it relevant? In other words, uh, uh, is the project does the project reflect the expectations or success criteria for change for that particular group, or it's just they are just indicators that would rather not be achieved at the end of the day. Then uh, can they be tracked, or are they time bound? When do you expect to achieve these results, for instance? So at the end of the day, if your indicators are ambiguous, not clear, not specific, not relevant, not realistic, then you might end up failing because maybe the conditions within which the intervention is being implemented are not conducive enough to help you achieve the results you are looking for. Okay, so you have an example here, a project within with a name of increasing accessibility to safe water to reduce waterborne diseases. Okay, so here the increase in accessibility of safe water would be your outcome, and then reduction in waterborne diseases in a community would be your impact. Okay, so that's what I was talking about when we're explaining the roles earlier on. So examples of indicators may be, okay, at output level you have number of percentage or number of boreholes constructed, or number of bore of percentage or number of water taps constructed, or number of or percentage of health educators established to maybe educate people on how safe they can maintain or use safe water, and so on. And outcome indicators, you could then have a number or percentage of people knowing at least 3 causes or effects of waterborne diseases, because if they know, if they can access that, if you have provided, if you have delivered, maybe constructed boreholes in this community, do these community members know why such boreholes are important, and therefore should be able to know that there are causes and effects of waterborne diseases. Okay, so if the knowledge has improved, in that case, maybe through educator processes and so on, then you should be able to reduce the number of people suffering from waterborne diseases, but at a certain particular period of time. Okay, so these indicators are showing quantity or quality of the changes that have been uh, realized. But one issue here is that these indicators are, for instance, lacking time bound. Okay, time bound, and they are also lacking um, a mention of target population, or what kind of population should be able to know about waterborne diseases. Okay, or in what area. So all those are factors that I'm talking about. So these examples are only showing the specificity in terms of quantity and quality, but they are, and also time, and also yeah, but they are not showing time or the target population that they would wish to realize those changes. So those are some of the things you should be able to put into consideration when you're designing your indicators. So under column again, we have assumptions or risks or critical factors. These are of course conditions that are external to the management implementation, or the implementation of the management and implementation of the intervention, and therefore can, if they are not, if the management is not aware of those, and therefore mitigate and prevent or control, or can be able to avoid them, then the certain results might not be achieved. So it's very important that those particular assumptions and risks are listed under each results chain phase. Okay, so you'll have assumptions for achieving outputs, assumptions for as conditions for achieving for outcomes, and so on. Okay, so some of the factors that may affect progress, of course, policy support, maybe from the government, even if it's an NGO implementing a certain project. Does it do such activities, or is the intervention supported by certain policies? Appropriate technology that can be used. You have environmental protection, maybe there are protection policies and legal frameworks, social cultural issues, if it's about such as, for instance, gender issues. Maybe in that community you want to help women to demand for legal services, but then in a patriarchal community, then women would be limited in terms of movement, maybe to achieve to access such services. Okay, so so this is a summary of what I've just been talking about, and so I won't repeat this, but you can just take a look at this and then see how you can internalize and getting it. But of course, one thing to note is that the assumptions here under the main goal or impact, sometimes you are not considered, because at the end of the day your project implementation stops with the core problem, in addressing the core problem. So these assumptions are beyond, but they would influence sustainability of the impact that you have created. So you'll find in some cases such factors are not listed here, because the management of the project might end with what they can be able to manage in avoiding or not to avoid at the end of the day. Okay, so in other words, in simple terms, the logical framework identifies the relationships between activities, inputs, outputs, outcomes, and then of course the impact. Okay, and such relationships are determined through what we call logical thinking or sensible thinking. In other words, so if there are those relationships, as we have been discussing, that the inputs influence how activities would be carried out, and such a combination would influence how outputs would be achieved, and outputs would influence outcomes, and then outcomes achieve help in achieving impact. How then can we be able to think about such a chain in terms of results that we want to achieve? So the logic here that is usually applied is the if-then logic, and this is explained right here. So you have this thinking of, okay, if the results are delivered, if for instance if you have the inputs and you carry out the activities and the results are delivered, and the assumptions or the other factors that we talked about, the external factors, are hold true, then the project purpose will be achieved. Okay, so you have here, you assume, for instance, you have the inputs, So we can use the let's use the project that maybe I gave an example about, trying to reduce the waterborne diseases within a particular community, and therefore your project could be maybe construction of boreholes, or extension of tapped waters. Tapped water points. Okay, so let's say that's our project. So you assume, for instance, the budget is enough, with enough, maybe you have enough human resources and finances to invest in this intervention of construction of boreholes. So the activities would be maybe bringing materials to the construction site. Maybe you have training of communities on how to maintain and use these boreholes, or and so on, and that should be able to happen within certain limits of certain activities. Maybe you say, maybe here the assumption could be that maybe the community members are willing to participate in the intervention implementation. Okay, here we're talking about second line of assumptions, and if the community members are willing to do so, and maybe you anticipated that they are willing also to contribute certain resources, and we assume that those resources are there, and the assumption is that maybe another assumption could be that, okay, the local government or Ministry of Water and Environment is supportive enough to do that. Maybe the government is also willing to keep financing the implementation process. Then you should be able to construct your boreholes. Okay, so let's assume your boreholes are now constructed. The assumption is, we assume here that that community members are willing to use, to access, are willing to utilize, to use water from those boreholes. And maybe assumption is that now community members are aware of these of other risk factors of using other water sources that are not that do not have safe water. And also maybe an assumption that maybe that now now that they have boreholes, they would be able to use them as they are supposed to be used. Okay, so in that case, you would be able to, you should be able to to achieve your purpose goal of having community members having easy access and use of safe water. Now, the assumption here is that, if the assumption is that community members are willing to maintain the boreholes, and therefore should be able, if they are maintained, then you should be able to in a long term achieve your overall objective, which is a reduction in waterborne diseases in that particular community. Okay, so that is how the relationship is illustrated and presented. Okay, so but of course you have, of course, the means of the indicators. You should be having the indicators here that show the overall objective, that community members, that you have reduced number of waterborne cases in the community. Here you should be able to have indicators such as satisfaction with the boreholes, and maybe how many, the number of people that are easily accessing such safe water. And here you should be able to have the number of maybe boreholes that have been constructed, and so on. But then, of course, you need information to verify those your indicators. So the sources of verification could be under activity, could be that maybe your you have maybe reports or budget reports where all the receipts or the paperwork where activities are, where maybe the participants are signing that they are working, but also showing the daily achievements in terms of what activities have been done. And then under results you could have maybe a whole maybe you could verify by observation, seeing that for sure in that community several boreholes have been constructed, and then they are all that they are also then here under project purpose. You maybe you're observing how community members are using these changes in terms of use of these of in terms of use of these boreholes, rather than using the other maybe contaminated water at the wells or in the swamp and so on. So you should be able to observe that, or you have records of how these boreholes have been are being maintained and used by these community members. And then the overall objective, the source of verification under overall objective, maybe there are reports at health center that are showing that maybe since your objective, since you implemented your project, then the health center no longer now receives many cases of waterborne diseases. Okay, so this is how the logic is thought about. So that's the sensible thinking we are talking about, and that's the logic that therefore gives the other fundamental name of logical framework. Okay. So I already talked about this. Okay, so you have inputs and activities towards goals, and you can see the bigger the arrow shows the control by the management. So as we move through inputs, activities, and outcomes, that's implementation. And mostly you have management and implementers have full control of how things should be. But as we move towards purpose and goal, and therefore towards closure of the project, the management and the internal management of risks and factors and success and results reduces, and therefore that's why you see here we have that beyond control. This is beyond control. The purpose and goal are beyond control. For you, you have produced your outputs, but then beyond that, you cannot hide influence how community members, for instance, would use the boreholes. You can't influence those that such changes, or whether they would continue using such boreholes also. Okay. So the logical framework can, of course, be used to improve quality of project design, provides objective basis for activity review, and therefore results-based management, analyzing and assessing the expected results, and of course also analyzing or managing the external factors that would have or would influence how that would affect the success of the intervention. But of course it also communicates information in a concise and specific way that would make the evaluators stay focused in terms of assessing the results. But of course it also helps in identifying the measurable performance in terms of those variables that would be indicated in the logical framework, as we have seen. Okay, and it also therefore helps the evaluators and managers to have a systematic, concise, and organized thinking about how the intervention is going on. Then of course this is what I talked about earlier on, that budget for the intervention can be incorporated in the log frame, but for some other organizations, they would have their budgets and inputs as not part of the log frame. But in any way, in one way or the other, the budget or input framework should be there, should be available, because without it, then implementation of activities and so on wouldn't happen. So, of course, in groups of 2 or 3, you will identify any development intervention and design a logical framework for it, and that will be presented before the next session. Yeah, so that would be your activity. I will embed it in the Moodle. So we've talked about the log frame, but then within the log frame itself is influenced by theory of change. And theory of change explains how activities of an intervention would contribute to a chain of results. And by a chain of results, we mean the short term, which are outputs, and the mid term, which are outcomes, and then of course the ultimate goal, which is the impact. So the theory of change shows a flow of how results would be achieved or are expected to be achieved for a certain intervention. So this is of course a schematic depiction of a theory of change. So you have implementation strategies or activities and inputs which would lead to outputs, considering that certain factors and assumptions are held to be true, and then you have of course your outcome, and then you have impact. So such chain of results is what relates to the theory of change that we're talking about. And this is just a simple example given by beta evaluation. So assume that you want to improve health of students in a certain school, and one of the inputs or activity could be delivery of apples to schools. So let's assume you have delivered apples to schools. So some apples can be eaten instead of junk snacks, so therefore they act as substitutes. Or red apple skin can be eaten, or apples can be eaten whole, or juice can be made from those. But so where you have apples eaten can come with vitamin C, and then you have, for instance, red apple eaten improve quercetin levels, and then you have, of course, if apples are used to substitute for junk food, then you have decreased body mass index, and a combination of all those outcomes would lead to improved health. So you have your activities and inputs here, you have your outputs, and then you have your outcomes, and then you have your overall goal. Okay, so a chain of results, theory of change, and that's how you can anticipate it. Okay, but of course, assuming that there are other factors that are held constant in that case. Another example is this, where the theory of change is on male involvement in maternal and child health. So you assume you have your male interventions here. If they are implemented, for instance, maybe you give incentives to men, to couples that come together for antenatal health care services, and that could lead to positive changes among men in terms of perception and attitudes, and that could improve joint couples to come together, could improve male support at household level, male support towards their pregnant wives. That would also improve maybe, of course, women to take up those maternal and child health services, but it could also improve sexual reproductive health service uptake among men themselves, and at the end of the day, it can lead to create an impact of reduced, improved maternal and child health, and therefore reduced, of course, maternal mortality rate. Okay, so this is an example of theory of change. Okay, or some organizations, you'll find they call it program theory. Okay, so the theory of change can be used as an evaluation criteria, and therefore you can use the other relationship that we just talked about of applying the if then in terms of questions that would therefore influence how evaluation questions and designs are made, or what kind of questions as an evaluator you would ask yourself when you go or to assess certain results of a certain intervention. Okay, therefore focusing on causal effect. For instance, does for instance does provision of breastfeeding facility at workplace lead to better performance and better health among better performance among women, working mothers, and their children. Um, so you see, so if then, so if we introduce, for instance, if they introduced breastfeeding facility at work, did it improve on mothers' performance because they wouldn't have to travel back home to look after their children or to breastfeed? Or does it improve work performance because now they have enough break time to do so and then therefore concentrate on work? Also, so those are, you can see that's the evaluation criteria that we're talking about. So it can be used to identify specific evaluation questions related to elements of change, identify variables to include in the data collection, examine intervention aspects for implementation, but also assess the assumptions or external factors that would be are influencing the implementation of a certain intervention. So that takes us to the result-based management terminology and processes. So we've been talking about results, but then what is a result? Any measurable or desirable change that result from any implementation process, that is a result. Okay, and it should be measurable and it can be measured. Remember the indicators that we talked about. Okay, so the indicator should be able to be specific and help in measuring such a result. Yeah. So result-based management, that therefore is a management strategy that focuses on performance and achievement of results. And the results here we mean outputs, outcomes, and impacts. Okay, so in this case, since the logic framework already establishes such kind of results that we want, then the process of results-based management helps managers to be able to ascertain and attribute certain changes within communities or among target groups to that particular intervention. Okay, so you have the result type and you have change level. Under inputs, you have capital investment in terms of human and finance. So evaluation could check whether such were available or not. To be able to influence other results or activities. Say you have activities and the change level and activities translating theory into action. Okay, then you have outputs, which are operational changes. Maybe, okay, these are, for instance, the boreholes I was talking about, product, services, or knowledge and skills. Maybe, for instance, let's say you want to help in reducing HIV infections among a certain secondary school, and therefore you have initiated an intervention of sensitization and awareness creation within that school. So the product here could be that maybe groups of individuals have been trained on peer training with among the students, and you have a number of those students that can be able to champion such sensitization and creation awareness creation among secondary school, and therefore would contribute to outcomes, which are values, laws, rules, and behavior changes, maybe perceptions among maybe secondary school school concerning contraceptive use, or maybe condom use and so on, maybe to reduce pregnancies among secondary schools, and therefore creating certain impact, maybe social and so on. So could be that maybe your project was on maybe uh, sensitization or awareness creation among primary schools to reduce teenage pregnancies, or secondary to reduce teenage pregnancies. So you invest in, you have trainers of trainees, and then you put in budget to facilitate the training, and then activities, you do the actual training of these secondary school peers and trainers, and then you have the number of trainers that you have trained, and therefore schools have been sensitized and so on, and then the teenagers have now positive perceptions on how to 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 avoid teenage pregnancies, and therefore you have reduced the number of teenage pregnancies. So that is how the chain of results flows. So again, back to the sensible thinking, because the theory to be able to create a better theory of change, then you also have to use the sensible thinking, the logic of if then, the causality. So causal effect relationship, remember we talked about the logical framework helping in establishing those relationships. So when you're dealing with results-based management or evaluation of results, then you should be able to establish certain causality among the uh, the deliverables or the activities that you're trying to achieve. So you have implementation and results, and the sensible thinking is that you have inputs. So if inputs are available and they are utilized, then activities should be able to be carried out. If activities are carried out, you should be able to achieve your inputs. If the inputs have been achieved, then outcomes are achieved. If outcomes are achieved, then they should lead to impact. So the idea is that you have a movement from short term to long term results. Okay, but when it comes to attribution or result-based management and evaluation, at the end of the day, we should be able to know that these long-term or short-term changes have been achieved following the implementation of that particular intervention. Okay, so when it comes to attribution, the higher you move from short-term towards long-term, the lower attribution you can ascertain. So in other words, when it comes to so there is attribution versus contribution. So remember I talked about, for instance, a certain program to have different combination of of projects, but those projects are working towards achieving a certain objective of the program. But then at the end of the day, you should be able to know that, okay, if for instance we talked about that construction of boreholes should be able to reduce on waterborne diseases. Certainly, yes, boreholes are known that it is known that boreholes will have safer water and therefore contribute to reduction of waterborne diseases. But it's not only boreholes that contribute to reduction in waterborne diseases. There are other projects that could contribute to that, maybe sensitization, creation of awareness, and so on. Those could be different activities and different interventions. But then at the end of the day, you should be able to evaluate and ascertain that your there are results that can be attributed to your specific objective, and we are saying that the higher we go towards impact, the lower rate of attribution that we can say that our objective, that our intervention is the one that has created certain changes. Because when you close the project, you expect results to continue, but the changes created by the impact created by this intervention should be able to be sustained. But such sustainability depends on other factors or other intervention, if you will. Okay, so that's why attribution now reduces, and then we move towards contribution. Okay, so it's very, very important that you take note of that. Okay, so results chain simplified. So you have inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. So apples and apples, and you have people at risk of poor health. Then you distribute apples, and then apples are eaten. And then if apples are eaten, then there is improved nutritional status, and therefore there is improved health, and therefore you have reduced a number of people at risk of poor health. Okay, so that's the results chain, as you can see. So what we can say is that, for instance, as Osborne and Gibler state, you can find this in Kusik 2004. The power of measuring results. That if you do not measure results, you cannot tell whether your project has succeeded or failed. If you cannot see success, you cannot reward it. If you cannot see success, you cannot learn from it. At the end of the day, the whole idea of evaluation is accountability and learning. So if you don't know, if you can't be able to ascertain or assess certain results, then you can't be able to learn from your project. If you cannot demonstrate results, you cannot win, of course, public support. Public support, in this case, the communities or the target population, for instance, that you're trying to create change for. Okay. The bottom line is that measuring or managing results, of course, depend on evaluation, but evaluation would depend on how different assessments are done, but such assessment would also depend on what exactly the project intended to achieve. Okay, and therefore that can influence whether you can be able to attribute certain changes to that particular intervention. But of course, all these the measurement of results or success would depend on the standards that would have been set before the project is implemented, and that such standards can be set using data from baseline, and we shall look at that in session 8. But also to measure and manage results, such management should be able to be done using, for instance, impact evaluation to test whether the project is achieving the intended results or not. And therefore we shall look at impact evaluation in session 9. Okay, so some references for your benefit. You can visit them and see how you can utilize them. Thank you. That marks the end of this session.